the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. This is the first of 2 live episodes that were recorded at the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society's 2023 annual meeting in Houston, Texas. The topic of this panel discussion was equitable access to the outdoors, a subject that's timely and important in all areas of the West, but especially important in Texas, where 93% of the state's land is privately owned. Whether your interest is outdoor recreation, public health, climate change, or public-private conservation partnerships, the ability for people to have access to parks, trails, open spaces, and wild places is becoming more and more important with each passing year. For this conversation, I was joined on stage by 5 Texas conservation innovators, folks who are working hard to ensure that Texans of all stripes have ample opportunities to spend time outside, whether in the cities or in the state's more rural areas. In order of their appearance in this conversation, we had Jaime González, who's the Healthy Communities Director for the Nature Conservancy, Sarah Coles, who's the Executive Director of the Texas Children in Nature Network, Immanuel Salas, Texas Parks and Wildlife's R3 Coordinator for Hunting and Shooting Sports, Neal Wilkins, who's the President and CEO of the East Foundation, and Joseph Fitzsimons, a conservationist and owner of the San Pedro Ranch. You can check out the episode notes for more information on each of the panelists and links to their respective bios and organizations. I could have spent hours talking to each of the panelists individually, but as a group we had a very informative and educational conversation, one that provided a different perspective from some of my past episodes that focused on equitable access. We covered a lot in this hour-long discussion, including the importance of building thriving cities with ample parks, trails, and outdoor space, how these organizations are working to reverse some of the disheartening trends around children's health and their access to the outdoors, the importance of collaborative partnerships, the R3 program in Texas, what it is, why it's important, and how it's evolving, the role of private landowners in providing access opportunity, the importance of youth education, the role of government, public land in Texas, the need to engage with elected officials, some of their favorite books, and much more. I learned a lot from this conversation, was honored to share a stage with such an impressive group of people who are working so hard on this all-important issue. Click the link in your podcast player to access all the notes and links from this episode. We've listed tons of excellent resources. A big thanks to John Kinsey and the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society for inviting me to host this event, and thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy.
Thanks a lot, John. My name's Ed Robertson, and if things had gone according to plan, I'd be a stockbroker at Merrill Lynch, but I took a bunch of twists and turns in my career, and now at age 45, I've got a podcast, and that's my full-time job. So it's, for any of you young folks here, don't take yourself too seriously with your career. It can wind up in really cool places. I'm really honored to be here, John. Thanks so much for inviting me. John reached out a long time ago and asked me if I was interested in this. And I'd had a bit of interest in Texas and wildlife conservation, everything that y'all are doing down here in Texas. And I thought I was kind of starting to understand, the complexities and the opportunities and all the great things y'all were doing. And then I had Dr. Dave Hewitt as a guest on my podcast. And it was as if I was sitting in a college class and I learned how much I did not know. And that conversation with him really just opened it up to all the great stuff y'all are doing and how much more I have to learn. So when John reached out about this, I was like, this is an opportunity for me, selfishly, to dig in deeper on all the great stuff y'all are doing. So I really appreciate it. My goal for this conversation is to kind of 2 goals. We've got the audience here. You guys are all wildlife professionals interested in wildlife. So I'd love to talk with these experts here and make the case for why equitable access is important for the work that y'all do on a daily basis. And then kind of a second tier is all the people that are going to be listening to this when I put it on the internet. And I feel like all the work y'all are doing here in Texas is so interesting and so unique. And I'd love to just be able to, for all the listeners all over the West and crazily all over the world, to get a taste of the cool things y'all are doing. So that's kind of my goals for the conversation. And I wanted to start out with Jaime. I'm a big fan of Nature Conservancy. I actually partner with them on some podcast stuff, and I worked with them in another life when I was in the conservation world. In Colorado, where I am, the majority of our work with Nature Conservancy is wide open grasslands.
Yeah.
And but as I'm digging into the Nature Conservancy website, I see that one of the priorities you guys have is to build healthy cities. And so I was hoping maybe you could start out just by talking a little bit about your work at TNC, what your focus is, particularly here in Houston, and then I've got a few follow-up questions.
Sure. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So thanks so much for having me here at the Wildlife Society. So I'm Jaime González. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. I think many of you know who we are, but we are a very large international conservation group. We've been working here in Texas since 1964. One of our first purchases was the Atwater Prairie Chicken National Wildlife Refuge with WWF. And like many of our lands, they've gone on to provide access in the form of wildlife refuges, state parks, and those kinds of things. So we're real proud about that. We're approaching about 1 million acres conserved. But the state is changing, and it has been changing for decades at this point. Right now, about 85% of Texans are urban. So that shift has already occurred. You have a state that's rapidly diversifying. So here in Harris County, about 85% of youth under 5 are children of color. So that shift is changing. Biologically, things are changing. So to John's point earlier, what I'm trying to do with the projects that I'm doing here in Texas and in the state is to recognize that wildlife conservation has a really unique role to play right now. We're in a city that is besieged by flooding, increasing heat, and other things where native species, including forests, urban grasslands, which I work on a lot, wetlands, can play a role in really creating two things. One is a more resilient suite of places in Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, these major metro areas. So make them safer and more healthy to live in. And secondarily, to have places where kids who are disconnected from nature oftentimes find that love of wildlife that is going to hopefully translate into being healthier, happier people, but also being conservation voters, being people that can support this work and carry it forward. So a lot of my work here is really reestablishing, rewilding parts of the city so they are more climate ready, more equitable, and they provide that spark, that wonder that all kids are looking for, whether they've experienced a lot of nature or not. So a good example of this is I've been working with the Memorial Park Conservancy for years now. Right up the street, if you have not visited the Memorial Park Land Bridge and Prairie Project, it's the largest land bridge in Texas. It just opened up. It's spectacular. It could look like reforesting neighborhoods, but ensuring that the species that are selected and the structure that's selected is also uplifting biodiversity. It could look like a preschool project I'm working on right now. Instead of building a preschool in a very vanilla landscape, we're restoring about 4.5 acres of prairie wetlands and over 200 trees elected by Texas A&M Forest Service. So when I see big cities, whether it's San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Dallas, the RGV, what I see are mostly blank canvases that can be rewilded for human health and well-being, for equity, and for that prospect of adventure that all kids deserve.
I love that. And one thing that I love about the Nature Conservancy is how data-driven and quantitative a lot of the work is. It's science-based organization. And when you're describing kind of your goals, some of it you can quantify pretty easily with acres conserved, that kind of thing. But when you're thinking about introducing the next generation to the outdoors, that can get kind of vague. So how does the Nature Conservancy go about measuring success? Like when you think about maybe what you're judged on for your job performance, what is the kind of the quantitative way that you measure success, if at all, when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think that is a really great question. Mostly we're looking at number of gallons stored that are floodwaters that don't get to our neighbors, or acres protected, or linear miles of streams. So we use pretty conventional measures for success, and those are accurate and good measures. In terms of like what is the human benefit of using this, one of the things right now we're exploring is something called the One Health model. One Health model is something that we all know, but it rarely gets operationalized in planning and projects, which is It's that intersectionality between human health and well-being, ecosystem health, healthy water, soil, air, and climate, and biodiversity or animal health. So one of the things we're doing right now is we're on a journey with some local medical professionals to figure out how do you do that. Now, I will say that there has been a lot of research that has come out of the pandemic in terms of how nature uplifts human health and well-being, especially mental health. So some of the ways that we could do that is our team worked on a pilot project to have a health toolkit. So if you are looking to install nature in places, you could do some pre and post surveys in terms of that intervention. So there are ways to measure it. It's complicated, but my goal is to make sure that the nature is there so that people can get it when they need it, which is most helpful every day to build those future conservationists.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's one thing I want to hit on as we go through is the pandemic and how that affected everybody's work up here. Because prior to this going all in on this podcast, I was a conservation director at a regional land conservation group in Colorado, doing a lot with irrigated farmland. And that was the pandemic it accelerated things pretty quickly. Sarah, I'd love for you to kind of introduce yourself to the audience and talk about Texas Children in Nature and what y'all do, because I've been so impressed with your website and the films you make and all your marketing materials, and it just seems like have been filling an important niche, but in these last 3 or 4 years, filling an even more important niche. So could you just, for those who are not familiar, explain the organization?
We're going to hold the mic.
There we go.
So, hello all. My name is Sarah Coles. I am the Executive Director of the Texas Children in Nature Network. Thank you so much, Wildlife Society, for inviting me to speak tonight. I really appreciate being able to share with y'all. So, Texas Children in Nature Network, our mission is to ensure equitable access and connection to nature for all children in Texas. And we do that because the research shows that kids who play and learn outdoors on a regular basis are healthier, happier, and perform better in school. And a lot of what Jaime has been saying has really been highlighted over the last few years. Pre-pandemic, the average amount of time kids spent on screens per day was 7 hours, and the amount of time they spent outdoors was less than an hour per week. So 7 hours a day on a screen, less than an hour a week outdoors. And since then, we've been starting to get some new numbers post-pandemic shutdowns, and it's 9 to 10 hours per day in front of a screen. On a conservative end, it looks like it's probably going to be a lot closer to 11 to 12 hours in front of a screen every day. We're seeing this have some dramatic effects in terms of our kids' health. We're right now in a children's mental health crisis. We are seeing 1 in 10 kids suffering from suicidal ideation. We are seeing 1 in 5 kids with anxiety or depression. And this is self-reported numbers. So I don't know if y'all remember when you were in high school, you did a survey and you had to tell an anonymous person all about you. And that is data that we look at, and that data we have from 2021 is showing those staggering numbers. And when we look at children of color and girls, those numbers are even higher. We are seeing in terms of children's development, their balance is off. Kids are literally falling out of chairs because they are not climbing trees, running in the woods. We are seeing 3D depth perception is off because kids aren't exploring the outdoors like they used to. So we're seeing lots and lots of scary things happen, but we do know that there's a solution to this, and that's getting more kids outside playing. And so we are really working on a lot of things with that. The way our organization works is we're a collective impact model, which means we work with probably a lot of y'all's organizations that are in this room to really work to make some systematic change within the state to get more kids outside. So we do things like work with school districts to work on getting more kids outside during the school day through things like recess and outdoor learning, putting outdoor classrooms in spaces. We're working with the Department of State Health Services right now to really promote nature as a public health strategy, that it is just as important for everyone as sleep, exercise, diet, regular doctor's appointments. Nature is on that list of things that really help impact your health. And so we've been really promoting some really great programs doing that. I work with the Nature Conservancy quite a bit in the work that they're doing to get kids outside. And so we are definitely really working to make some giant strides across the state.
And one of the things I noticed pretty quickly on your website was the number of partner organizations you have. And I when I was Googling, I always say by any normal standard, the amount of research I do would be considered stalking, but it's for the podcast, so I can Google. But I found, and it wasn't too long ago, maybe like a year or two ago, there were 500, and now there are 600. And so I think that's such a powerful thing to think about, that you're leveraging and connecting all these different groups that may be doing great work individually, but you're bringing them into this network that expands their influence and their power and leverages it all up to a whole new level. So could you explain a bit about how that partnership model works? Because I feel like that's where the real power is.
Yeah, and actually I pulled numbers this morning for our board meeting tomorrow, and we just crossed 700. Yeah.
Nice. Congrats.
So I tell folks all the time, our job at Texas Children and Nature Network is to help y'all fulfill your mission in order to get kids outside. So we do this through a variety of ways. Our biggest way is through resource sharing. So we will collect resources, create resources, share resources with y'all to make you better at your jobs. So we do this through a few things. One thing we have is our monthly webinar series. And these are series that we bring in experts from all over the world to come in and share what they've been doing, any research that they have. And we provide this basically free for y'all. There is no cost to become a partner of TCINN. We really work to make this a resource that's available for you. Another thing we do is we have what is called technical advice, so TA visits. So all of our partners are eligible to have a TA visit with our staff members whenever they make an appointment to do so. And so this is pretty wide ranging. Just this week, I had a call about a grant application that someone was doing. I've had calls about a school bond that was gonna be passed. We will consult on a wide variety of things. And so we're able to come in and serve as a set of ears for folks that maybe don't have anyone else in their organization that they can talk to about something. Maybe they're a really small shop and they are the one. And so we'll serve as a set of ears. We can also serve to connect. So a lot of times what I'll do is someone will call and say, hey, we're working on this project. So a great example is in San Antonio. They have a program called Nature Smart Libraries. And so their libraries really work to get kids outside through that system. Well, we had some libraries down in the valley that were interested in learning more about that. I'm not the expert in that, but I know who is. I know the city of San Antonio is. So I will connect those folks together and they can talk and have that conversation. And so a lot of what I do is that connection as well. And then the third thing that we do in terms of resource sharing is our annual conference. And we do that every year in December. And I would say it is the most fantastic resource sharing that we do throughout the year. We bring in keynote speakers, and then our partners are able to present the work they've been doing. And it's really inspiring to the folks who are able to come and participate with that.
The only problem with this panel is that I want to talk to each person for about an hour and a half. Maybe we'll do follow-up podcast episodes. Immanuel, I would love to hear all about your work, but I think maybe for the folks not familiar, can you start out by defining R3 and talk about that program? Because I think most people in here probably know, but I would imagine my podcast listeners maybe is 50-50. They've probably heard the term, but don't fully understand it. Can you define that for us?
You bet, Ed. Thank you. Hello, Wildlife Society. Thanks for having us up here. My name is Immanuel Salas. I work for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and I'm one of your 2 R3 coordinators. The other coordinator focuses on angling and boating, and I get to do hunting and shooting sports, so I get the fun stuff. I get to work with more of y'all on more of y'all's specific programs. When we say R3, Ed, we're talking about recruit, retain, and reactivate. So in very, very broad strokes, that simply means to reach out to those folks that are not doing yet, get them active, get them actively engaged. Those that are participating right now, how do we retain them? How do we keep them engaged? Whether that's providing new types of activities, new variations of those activities, and making those activities easier to participate in, or reactivating those that have retired, either literally or figuratively, and trying to bring them back to those activities. And so, yeah, I can gobble up the rest of your time. I sure don't want to do that. I want to hear more from everybody as well myself. But I think I can encapsulate that in this idea, the reactivation piece, for instance. We typically look at that as a license sale. This person was fishing last year. She stopped fishing. When I revisit that individual, I understand that she was a very enthusiastic fly angler. That was her passion. Can we re-engage her in a mentorship role? Can she engage maybe an audience that wants to participate in fly fishing and start off with fly tying workshops, et cetera? How do we empower her and create a network of support and promote that so that she can reactivate, get back involved, but by sharing her passions out? And we can see that across all the different activities that we participate in. The 4 pillars that we look at are hunting, shooting sports, angling, and then boating. It includes all variations and varieties of those things, from sailing to kayaking to motorboats. Shooting is everything from archery, self-defense, 3-gun competition, everything like that. Also how it transitions obviously into hunting. Hunting and angling are pretty self-explanatory.
And can you talk a bit about why R3 is a priority? Because there were some charts, I believe I found it maybe in the R3 strategic plan, that shows the number of hunters and anglers, people purchasing, and then it also shows the population. And one is pretty steady and one is going straight up. So on a percentage basis, it's getting smaller and smaller. Can you talk about it really from a financial standpoint and what that means for the state of Texas?
Yeah, perfect. And as John had mentioned too, the demographics they're not changing, they've changed. It's switched. So the idea that most Texans are hunters, shooters, and anglers is just not the case anymore. We're increasingly urbanized, all of this. There was an interesting talk that Steve Rinella gave where he addressed R3 and the attempt to recruit more hunters specifically. And he pointed out that statistically, even if we doubled the amount of hunters, even in this state, it barely moves the voting needle. So that's not really the critical metric if we want to get very, brass tacks down to it. When it comes down to, voting, really pushing for our lands, to create advocates for our public lands, it can't be just anglers and shooters anymore. We need to let everyone know the value of these resources and illustrate how hunting, shooting sports, boating, all of these things directly fund all of our efforts. Y'all's jobs, your future jobs, your careers are largely funded by these excise taxes, these federal grants, et cetera. And that's driven by the sportsmen and women of this country and of this state specifically. You do not need to hunt. We do not make it a priority to turn everyone into a hunter or an angler. That's not, and it may not be feasible. You just think about the numbers, right? But we would hope that we can demonstrate the value of those activities, both in terms of food. That's a very obvious value base right there. We can look at the meals that are provided through this activity, but also the funding, the conservation. Those are angles that we look at quite a bit. And then the history and the tradition of it. So those are all very standard arguments, reasons to tell people, you should support my decision to hunt or fish. So that's not going to work very much longer, because the changing demographics, the changing value systems of our fellow Texans. We have to speak to something deeper than that, more meaningful than that. So that's why we explore the human dimensions aspect of the activities. Why do we value wildlife? What does it mean for us, in our lives, our development, and character, self-efficacy, resilience, all these types of things? Mama Nature is a great teacher. It's a wonderful platform to test ourselves and to improve ourselves. When we start to engage in these things, we become more self-reliant and more responsible for activities. We have those pro-environmental behaviors, not just recycling, things like that, but we tend to not trash out our kayak launches when we realize the value of that kayak launch and the fact it could be taken away. We think about hunters, like backcountry hunters and anglers, organizations like that organize trash cleanups at our public land to preserve the right to go out there and hunt on our public land. That's grassroots. That's people that appreciate and value these activities, want to go out and protect them. And that's just hunting. And while I'm personally very focused on that, it's really a small piece of the pie. Because when we think of the conservationist citizen, if they will advocate for their right to hunt and fish and recreate in these wild places, they're more likely to vote. They're more likely to care about their neighborhoods. It's this exponential thing. If I'll start here, but now I'm going to take better care. I won't pick on my sister as much. I'll give better care of my family. I'm going to clean up the house when company's coming over. I care about my community. I'm not going to trash out that park because that is where I play. When I go to a state park, I'm not going to leave my trash everywhere because the ranger taught me about leave no trace and yada, yada, yada. I understand now. And when we talk about our disenfranchised audiences who don't feel like they have a voice or a connection to hardly anything nowadays, you can take them to these natural places and say, right now we can do this thing on this trail, on this water body, on this kayak launch that will improve this for other people. And you can take pride in that. And a lot of these young people especially don't have anywhere else they can do that. Think about their school situation, their home situation, etc. So through connection to the outdoors and a responsibility to the outdoors and a need to give back to and protect and be steward of those outdoors, we actually empower people, I think, to be better citizens.
I feel like that's one of the most powerful things about the outdoors. You get instant feedback. For me personally, that's very rarely in modern day life. If you make a decision, it could be days or weeks or months before you get the feedback on it. But in the outdoors, it's instant. And in the case of cleaning up these trails or cleaning up a boat launch, you can see the progress you did. And it's crazy to think that that's abnormal, but when you see it, it's powerful. Neal, I'm very interested to hear your perspective on this from the perspective of the East Foundation, because you primarily are working in private land, but you all are very focused on the educational aspect. So for people not familiar, and I know you guys are a sponsor of this event, so I think most people here are familiar, but maybe not on the podcast. Can you talk about the East Foundation and what you guys do?
All right. I'm Neal Wilkins. I'm with the East Foundation, and we operate across about 220,000 acres of private ranch land in deep South Texas. So our mission is to advance land stewardship through ranching, science, and education. So we're land managers, we're scientists, we work in collaboration with researchers at universities, we work close by with our neighbors on private landowner issues. And so we end up with good land, good science, a good cattle herd, but that's not enough. Land stewardship is going to take people. And the root of everything that we're talking about here is the land. And if we don't have good land stewards, and that doesn't mean just the people that are managing land, that means people that are voting, that means the electricians that are in your home, that are thinking about what their kids are going to be doing and thinking about land and land stewardship. If we don't have that, then we've lost what we have in Texas, which is 140 million acres of private farms, ranches, and forest lands that provides an unbelievable wildlife diversity and rangeland diversity and forest diversity across the state. So one of the things that we really focus on in our education program is getting kids out on the land. So we call that our Behind the Gates program. Over the last 10 years, we've had over 20,000 kids out on the land in yellow school buses. So this year, in fact, next week at our El Sal's Ranch, we'll have a little over 1,500 fifth graders from the valley that will come out for day-long events where they're educated with our partners with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Texas Wildlife Association, NRCS, the Museum of South Texas History, and they'll learn about everything from wildlife conservation to rangeland management to the history of the land. What we've found that does, particularly when you catch those kids early in 5th grade through 8th grade, it makes them better at school, makes them better at arithmetic, it makes them better at algebra, it makes them better in science, so they're more likely to be successful. But just as important is that these programs help them fall in love with the land so that when they are successful, and they're more likely to be successful, keep in mind that these kids coming from the valley are likely to be first generation to go to college if they are to go to college, largely Hispanic, just a demographic that's going to be the face of Texas, right? And so we think it's really important that we not only introduce those kids to land stewardship and what it means to manage private lands and the value of private lands in the state, but we think it's important that we have this compact with their teachers and their parents that the programs we provide and the programs that we provide with our partners like Texas Wildlife Association make those kids more successful. And because they're falling in love with the land, they're more likely to care about that. And that's what we want in this state. We want successful people, care about land stewardship. They're more likely to take care of what we have now. So we're pretty optimistic as an organization. Our education programs have this purpose behind it, and it's almost a single-minded purpose, but there's a lot of collateral benefits.
And can you talk a bit about how, if at all, your educational efforts have changed over the last 3 years, during this pandemic? Did that change your focus or narrow it down a little more? Or are you've got a good formula and you're sticking with it? I'm always, at least in my world of conservation in the Central Rockies, I feel like the pandemic was such a massive shift across all levels. Did that change y'all's focus at all?
Sure, it changed. It didn't change what our objective was, but we've got really innovative educators that know how to interact with kids. I mean, Masi Mejia is out there. She's like, if you go to Laredo with Masi Mejia, she's an all-star in Laredo. So Masi's out in the audience there someplace. We've got educators that are like that, or contract educators, go into the schools. Those contract educators just pulled back. Our staff educators worked with them and Texas Wildlife Association to put together virtual field lessons. And we didn't stop. We didn't stop with those kids. Now, as soon as we could get them back out and on the land, and we pushed the edge of the envelope on that with the school districts. I mean, we met with school superintendents and everything else, letting them know that for COVID, the 150,000 acre San Antonio Viejo Ranch might be the safest place your kids could be.
Still is.
Yeah.
That's great. That's really great. Joe, all the way down there at the end, I feel like you kind of straddle two different worlds. You and your wife, Blair, have done so much for private land conservation, land stewardship, all throughout Texas. People, when I was doing my Google stalking, it became clear I wasn't the first one to call you a power couple of conservation. I think that's used over and over. But you also have your foot in the public lands, and you've got a great passion for public lands. And I was wondering if you could just tell a little bit of your story of how you got involved with these private lands through your work with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission, because we had a great talk about that, and I think it's a cool story.
Well, thanks very much, Ed, and it's great to be back. The Wildlife Society after the last couple of years and through the pandemic. It's good to see everybody again. I've known a lot of you since a long time, to date myself. Okay, short answer. My background's in wildlife, ranching, and natural resources law. So I started off as a 17-year-old intern at Black Gap Wildlife Management Area, Parks and Wildlife. And that's what I wanted to do. And organic chemistry got in the way, right? Ended up being a lawyer. But when I got involved in wildlife and ranching, that's what I was focused on. But when I got to the commission and I had to start representing Texas Parks and Wildlife at the legislature, and especially in the two sessions that I was chairman, I realized that 85% you're talking about, they didn't have a clue what I was talking about. That might have been my communication skills. But I was just shocked that, staffers and the representatives, they're living in a different world. And if you don't have those shared experiences, you really are speaking a different language. So I became very passionate about funding of our state parks. And in 2007, we were fortunate in getting some relief for that park system. And then we kept at it. I think some people got tired of me staying after it, but we did. And in 2019, we were able to finally get a constitutional dedication of the sporting goods sales tax to state parks. Something had been promised for over 20 years. But sometimes that's the way it works in the political process. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. That money, $200 to $300 million biennium, is essentially there to patch up $800 million in backlog of maintenance and repair. It's not going to buy new parks. So I'm not here to, doom and gloom, but, the question is, you said the straddle. For me, what we care about, wildlife people, is simply not relevant to people who've not experienced the outdoors, haven't experienced what we all love. So I really love what I'm hearing here of starting to weave a lot of this together, because it's not going to be solved by state parks. It's going to take local parks, which we also fund through that program, and then through the sporting goods sales tax. But, like a botanical center, getting kids in those school buses know what a pollinator is, right? And so if you've got to start there, going and buying a 10,000 acre state park 4 hours from major metropolitan areas, they're probably not going to just decide, let's go to that state park. They've got to have some connection. So I just think if we can keep working together, and there's so many great programs. I mean, Texas Wildlife Association, y'all's programs. I'll plug one if you don't know about it already. City Kid Adventures. Probably know my friend Leon McNeil that runs that. And it's getting kids out there to experience it. So what's the next step? I'm on the steering committee of a group we call the Texas Land and Water Conservation Fund. And we're swinging for the fence of this session. I am cautiously optimistic we can get it done. And what it is, short version, a Texas version of the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund. Because what you were talking about is bringing together the private and the public. People tired of me using this phrase, but the land doesn't know, right? You always say when a duck's flying along and looks down, doesn't know if that's public, private, it just knows whether or not that's good habitat, right? Uh-huh. So getting them together through this Land and Water Conservation Fund, we're going to be able to fund both private conservation projects, which is like conservation easements, both term and perpetual, and public acquisition, local parks, county parks, state parks. Anyway, get involved is all I can say. I mean, God, it's so great to see for an older guy like me, see all these young faces. I mean, get involved. I told Ed at lunch about a great experience I had years ago with a famous Westerner, Al Simpson from Wyoming. And people were getting frustrated with the political process. And he said, well, you're either at the table or you're on the menu.
That's right. So show up, and groups, you all were really important in 1995 on the ag valuation. There are a few gray heads out there that remember. A lot of people didn't think we could get that done. But it makes a difference when wildlife professionals show up.
And I'd like to open this question up to anybody, and maybe the rest of these questions can kind of be to anybody who's had some experience in this, but I'd love to hear more about the politics side of things in a productive manner, because I think about, with this podcast over the years, I've always thought that everything I do on this Mountain and Prairie podcast is directed at the 23-year-old Ed Robertson, who was sitting in a job kind of unfulfilled and wanted to do something more important. So I get all these smart people like on the stage, and then I ask them questions. I think, what did 23-year-old Ed need to hear? And one of the things I could imagine myself saying is, I don't want to be involved in politics. I don't have anything in common with those people. It's a waste of my time. There's nothing I can do. But as what Joe just talked about, everything from Joe's experience to what Alan Simpson said, somebody's got to be involved, and if you're not involved, somebody else is going to be that may be going against your interest. And I actually met Romy Swanson there in D.C. Doing some conservation advocacy work, and it was one of the most positive experiences of my life, because I realized it did make a difference. And I was 41 when I did that. So I was wondering if anybody else up here on the panel has experience of dealing with elected officials, dealing with, quote, politics, and some success stories of what your efforts in that arena led to, because I think that's very instructive for especially young folks who may not think it matters.
Can I start off? Being a state employee, I can speak the least to this, so I'll just say my business and open it up to everyone else. When we're forming this panel and topic for discussion, one of the things that came up was threats. What are we up against? What's our challenge out there? So one of our major threats is that inactivity, is a potential constituent base that doesn't think their vote matters, doesn't think they'll go and vote for that the camping outdoor goods tax, for instance, but they showed up because they had communication, they saw the value of it. And so that's individuals who went out and put pen to paper and signed, and came away with their sticker, that made a change. And those dollars are funding our efforts. So whenever we can point to those successes, we should definitely do that and highlight that and truly challenge anybody that wants to sit there and cross their arms and say it doesn't matter. This is their opportunity to do so, so jump in there and make it happen. So the ability just to be complacent on the sideline, that's a threat. The other thing is, and I think we should always be sensitive to this, is being divided and letting other people turn us against each other. I hunt white-tailed deer, as many of you in here do. They mean a lot to me, and they mean a lot to you all. A lot of people don't support hunting and don't want hunting to go on. And if we allow those conversations to turn inward and against each other, and I should have access to this recreation area for my needs and not yours. Recreate the way I want to recreate, not the way you want to recreate. If we let that happen, we already have this small percentage of the population that's for these wild places and wild things, and that gets fragmented. So we lose our energy, we lose our momentum and our cohesiveness and our ability to work together. So I would say when we're discussing these political issues, just really find those commonalities, find the things that we care about the most, and focus on those things when we forge these partnerships. And we do need this generation of leaders to step up and carry that banner up the hill for us.
Well, and that was one of the reasons I started my podcast 7 years ago, is because I was in the real estate world working with ranchers, but I was also living in Boulder, Colorado, and my next door neighbor, I'm not calling names, but by pretty much any definition could be seen as like a militant environmentalist. And then I'd go out and have a conversation with a rancher that was on the complete opposite side of the political spectrum. On paper, they could not be more different. But what I realized is that they agreed on about 85% of the same stuff when it came to conservation. And that was one of the reasons I started the podcast, was to highlight that, because I'm like, that nobody's talking. And this isn't about me, sorry, but that's it. I think that's an important thing to remember, especially now. It's because it's only gotten worse since 2016. Any other kind of success stories from the political world?
So I might just want to mention, hopefully, a success story in the making. One of the things that, obviously as a wildlife community in Texas, we're concerned about is white-tailed deer that you just spoke about there. We have 6 million white-tailed deer in the state, 30 million Texans, and white-tailed deer are now threatened by chronic wasting disease. And so working through our state political process, one of the things that we've discovered is if you show up, you're relevant, you build trust, and then make sure that relevancy lays out what the public benefits of that resource is. So what for the 30 million people of the state of Texas, not just so what for what it means for me as a hunter or what it means for someone as a wildlife watcher, but what's the real economic benefit? And to many of our state legislators and elected government officials, that's the main thing that they have to think about when they're looking at these types of resources, be able to translate that. And we're making some headway doing that with chronic wasting disease and some of the things that need to be done in the state legislature to control the spread of chronic wasting disease. So that's not a victory yet, Ed, but it's premonition of a victory. How about that?
Yeah. Sarah, were you getting ready to say something?
Yeah, we had a pretty big victory in Austin with Austin ISD's latest school bond. So when we look at one of the biggest impacts that we can have in terms of kids getting outdoors on a regular basis, it's during the school day, because we know that's where kids spend a lot of their time. And when we look at our public land availability, and in most cities, where 85% of Texas is living. In most of the cities, the biggest landowner is the independent school district. And so when we're really thinking about that, we look at how greening a schoolyard can make a huge impact in a lot of kids' lives. And also in the environment. We see great environmental impact from habitat restoration, pollinators, flood mitigation. All of those things are positively impacted through greening schoolyards. So we worked with the school district and our partners at Parks and Rec and within the schools over the last couple of years on their education specifications, which means when a school is redesigned or constructed, it has to have an outdoor green space and it has to have a certain number of things. And it went from like a 1-page list to now a 20-page list of things that school needs to have in terms of environmental quality that covers everything from watershed protection, habitat restoration, and then also an outdoor space for the kids to be. So we did that prior to the school bond going up for a vote. And so we were able to really point to, for, a lot of Austin now doesn't have kids in the Austin school district. The city itself is demographically swaying younger and without kids. And so you would think, we were not going to get a ton of votes for a school district school bond because people aren't going to think that affects them. But we were able to put it into the campaigning for that. But look, there's these environmental systems that are going to be positively impacted through this as well, and really be able to highlight that and really be able to get folks excited to go out and vote for it.
That's great. And that brings me to my next question is, I love thinking about the importance of storytelling and the importance of being able to communicate all these complex issues. And everybody in the audience, you're smarter than I could ever be with science and with wildlife management and with all this stuff that can get extremely technical. And my background before I went all in on the podcast was water rights in Colorado. And I found that when I was trying to explain water rights to funders or stakeholders, that you could just see their eyes start glazing over. And I felt like a stand-up comedian kind of working out his set, and I bombed a lot. But then I figured out how to tell it in a compelling way that could connect with the audience. And I feel like everybody on this stage is a master storyteller because the work you're doing is extremely complex. But I was talking with Neal before we started, and there's a great article in the Garden and Gun magazine about all the work that the East Foundation is doing. I'll link to that on the webpage. And obviously Nature Conservancy, master storytellers, and Sarah, your organization, that film that I'll link to was so helpful for me to really get my head around it. And so I was wondering if you guys could talk a bit, if you do at all, about the importance, or maybe offer some advice to the audience who's doing highly technical work, but very important work, but the general world may not be able to understand it. Can you talk a bit about the importance of being able to tell that story, or how you go about doing that in a way that raises money, changes hearts and minds, gets kids outdoors? I'd love to hear how you could, selfishly for my own benefit, I'd love to hear how you do it.
Can I answer that?
Please.
So I have this is not a TNC thing, this is a Jaime internalized thing for whether I'm going to take a project. Is it going to change the system? Is it going to affect equity? There are more people going to have access to healthy nature. Is it going to change the ecology for the better? Is it going to connect with donors? And can you tell a really damn good story? Because if you can't tell a really good damn story, you're not going to get more money to do more good work, to tell the story, to do more work. And so and I'm a professionally trained communicator, so I'm just saying not everybody's going to be there. But what I will say is we're all teachers. We don't have a choice because we're human beings. You can choose to be a really good teacher or not. But I've seen a lot of career professionals who do amazing work, but they either bring their communications people in late into the game or at the end of a project, and so there wasn't a storytelling cycle that could be put in there to excite donors or supporters or politicians. And so, there's a very harsh saying in marketing that if you do something you didn't tell anybody, you didn't do it. That's hard, but it's true. And I've seen many projects that didn't get the viewership, the recognition, the extra money not because the work wasn't great, but because the story was underdeveloped or it wasn't told at all. So what I would say is that is one of your best strategies for getting the work that you need to get done is to see storytelling not as a tack on, but as a conservation strategy that is worth your time. If you can get training in interpretation, like I'm an interpretive guide, that's a really great way of thinking about stories that connect with people. Let me pull a few threads together just real quickly. Building political support across political lines, across party lines, across demographic lines, across any line that you can think of is going to depend on your ability to tell authentic stories about the same thing to different audiences. So, here in Houston, the middle of the city, if I lead with, I want to rebuild pollinator habitat. Some people, you'll cap out pretty quick. Some people will be like, great. And I care a lot about pollinators. But if I say, I'm going to make a multifunctional landscape that absorbs more water, and it cools the city, and it provides habitat and access to nature, and we call it a prairie in the middle of the city, it's going to make your community more resilient. Well, then politicians start to listen because you are caring about their folks in their district. So building political will, it's completely contingent on good storytelling, but the storytelling has to be true. You have to believe it when you say it to somebody, because otherwise it falls flat.
I love that. And like I said, I was in the real estate business before and would write these brochures about these ranches and like, oh, it's world-class elk. And I felt kind of slimy doing that. And then when I moved over to the conservation world, I was selling these projects with 100% authenticity.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the kind of weirdness about promoting went away because it matters.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great lesson for all, especially all the young folks. It's not self-promotion or in bad taste if you're doing good work and you're doing innovative stuff. Any other ideas?
Just tying into what you said earlier, you got to show them why it matters to them. So you're going to be passionate about your species of choice, your habitat of choice, these things that we all get fired up about. I helped an educator lead a trail. He was excited about fungi. This guy was on fire about fungi, and it was awesome. I was excited by his excitement, but he wasn't the best at communicating the value of it. Right. And so later we talked about the certified interpretive guide. So that's a training that will be available to all of you. And basically it's how do we take these universal themes and make them relevant to people, show them the value of the thing, and then imbue that with y'all's talents and passions and education. And it's when you couple those things together, you have a very effective golden thread that people will latch on to, and they want to follow that story. We're fortunate at our agency in that we do have the PBS show. So TBWD PBS shows, we're able to tell those stories. Our Lone Star Stewards, we're able to showcase them and these landowners that well above and beyond, working with our biologists and other advisors and our partners to help that habitat reach its ultimate capacity and potential. But then if it's not told, if we don't share that out, it doesn't really exist.
It doesn't exist.
And then other people aren't then inspired by that.
That's right.
They talk a lot about, recently with Texas Youth Hunt Program, we had a hunt master on that hunt who decided she wanted to buy land now in Texas. She had no intention of being a landowner in Texas. Why would she? She was from Houston. And she bought land because she saw the potential of what a landowner can do, what they can help it achieve. And that was very inspiring for her because of story, because she saw that live, and then she's able to promote that and show it to other people. So finding your own voice, and many of y'all are more technically proficient than I will ever be on some of these platforms. Again, we need your energy, we need your enthusiasm. The way it's always been done, throw that out the window. Learn from people that have come before you, but find your voice, get these tools, find these partners, and tell your story. Internally right now, we're working with all of our content producers to provide writing workshops for our own staff. So that those biologists that are at these wildlife management areas who are doing this work, all the things that they're doing and other duties as assigned, and then speaking the value of what they're doing, what they're seeing to others. And it's fantastic because we can't tell y'all's story for you. You have to do that. But sometimes we need those communication tools of, how to write a story or a social post or whatever it is that they do.
That's great. We're already bumping up on time, which I knew this was going to happen. It just goes too fast. We'll need to do part 5, 6. Yes, Joe.
I want to add one thing to your storytelling concept. Don't just tell stories. Take them out there. It's not enough just talk about it. That makes all the difference. And you see the work. I keep talking about my friend Leon McNeil, but those of you that know him know it's amazing the impact that he's had. So don't be afraid. Just invite people to the outdoors and let them touch and feel and see what you're talking about.
And something he's speaking about there is the action. And, you know, if you want to know somebody, listen to the words. If you want to know their heart, look at their actions. What do they actually do? And I'll just hog a minute here, if you don't mind, real quick. One of the reasons I'm very excited and proud to work for TPWD is the concept of this panel discussion was equity. It's vital. And we see it not just from the administration, from the leadership, but actually in practice. And if I could just tell a couple of things real quick. Right now, we do have an EDIAC committee. So we do have an Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Accessibility Committee who's designed to come up with best practices for internal staff that share that out to our partners. That's a piece. But also the Urban Outreach Advisory Committee, where we have partners in the community like Latino Outdoors, Afro Outdoors come in and tell us what they're seeing or not seeing from us. What bridges do we need to combine with our partners? So we have those things. So that's policy, and that's great, and that's happening. But then you have really amazing stuff from the actual staff. We have a game warden captain right now whose game wardens write tickets to a predominantly Spanish-speaking audience leading up to Lent because they don't understand that. Some of them don't understand, honestly, there are rules and regulations. They come from a culture that doesn't provide that stability. That's why they left that culture, and now they're here. Now we have rules, and they don't understand that, and they're not aware, or it's not accessible to them. So this captain says, what tools can I put in place so it's not me writing citations and causing more strife between this community, but how can we be positive? How can we get out ahead of that? How can I equip my wardens with those communication tools? So we're actively working on that, not just translated rules and regulations, but visual tools that are easily accessible, things like that. And then also the WMAs that are out there in these far-flung corners that are not immediately accessible to our urban audiences, which are critical, but serve a vital role to those communities right there. It's a misconception to think just because they're rural that they're all grown up with firearms in their hands, they know how to shoot, they know how to hunt, they know how to fish. That's a misconception. And so those WMA projects and our other efforts throughout our agency are actively doing that. And the only reason I bring that up because like telling a good story, we can talk about equity all we want, and you ask an agency, a program, what are we actually doing? How are y'all doing? How are y'all bringing people down and serving the community in the valley? And you can point to those activities. And we would hope that would be inspiring to you all, that you can see that these things are happening across the state.
I think to just echo off of you, it's also important that the people telling that story look and sound and reflect the community that they are telling that story to. I think that is something that we really need to make sure that we are paying attention to, especially when we're thinking about equity, that people in the community are seeing fellow community members telling that story. And that's where a lot of the work we do with community agencies, community groups like Latino Outdoors, Black Outside, really comes in to that work.
So last question. I love to leave the listeners or the people in the audience with something they can do. They can walk away from this and have some resources to learn more, because every time I talk to all these interesting, accomplished people, it's just scratching the surface. I'm like, I need to know more. And so I'd love it if, in no particular order, if there are any books or podcasts or films or any sort of resources, and I'll have these listed out on my website as well so people can click through, but that have been important to you in your role in conservation or in your role in the specific issue of equitable access, or just in your role, in your thoughts on storytelling. Maybe just a resource or two, and you can just throw them out as they come in your mind.
I'll give you one for storytelling. Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. They've written quite a few books about what makes a sticky story. It's not going to solve all your issues, but if you can think about making sticky stories, people go away with those. It really bothers them, and they got to think it through, and they got to mull it over, and they're going to come back and email you. That's where you want to be. You don't want quick facts that they can just discard. You want to kind of bother them a little bit. You want them to be curious, right? So Made to Stick by the Heath brothers.
I always recommend Seth Godin. I don't know if y'all follow him, but he's a marketing guy. pretty much anything I've done conservation-wise or podcast-wise has been Seth Godin. Sarah, I saw on your website, I can't remember the name of the book, but is it Nature Deficit Disorder? I thought that was I haven't read that, but it's been recommended by other people a lot.
Yeah, Richard Louv wrote Last Child in the Woods, which is about nature deficit disorder, and he's written a lot of other books since then, including The Nature Fix, Vitamin N, quite a few. All of his books are fantastic. Another book that has really been influential for us in terms of our health journey has been Angela Hanscom's Balanced and Barefoot. She's an occupational therapist that started seeing some really disturbing things within her practice and really set out to see how she can positively impact the kids that she was seeing, and started an outdoors-based practice, and her book is about that. So I think those are two really fantastic authors to look at. And then I was really trying to think through a bunch of things, and one is an Instagram that I follow, Parker McMillan Bushman, and the Instagram is Queen Work, and she is writing an inclusivity guide of the outdoors right now, and has worked in wildlife management in Colorado for a long time. She's based in Denver. That's a fantastic follow in terms of social media.
I'll go old school on you. In Texas, you can't beat John Graves. If you want to fall in love with the land, read Goodbye to a River from a Limestone Ledge and Hardscrabble. So my mother made me read those, made me fall in love with the land by doing that. That's the resource.
That's sitting on my shelf, and I have yet to read it, so now I have to.
No.
I know, it's unacceptable. Y'all don't throw me out of here for not reading that. Well, any others?
Well, this is a problem being down on this end. I mean, come on, John Graves, really? Talk about a softball. Sticking to the theme of how we connect people to the outdoors, equitable access. I would say Richard Luke's book, he came to the Texas Wildlife Association meeting. We invited him a few years back, right after his book, Last Child in the Woods, came out. And I'll tell you what, he had a huge impact on, frankly, a bunch of old, white, gray-haired Texas ranchers, right? And everybody was like, man, we better wake up, because those kids he's describing in that book, those 7-hour screen, 1-hour outdoor kids, are going to grow up and vote. That's right. And so that's a great book. But to make this transition between the importance of working lands to the public, and you all are going to be in those working lands, both public and private, is a book by Marion Horn, rancher, farmer, fisherman. And it tells the story through several chapters of different working lands operations that have been really critical to conservation. And then finally, Emma Maris' book, Rambunctious Garden. And Emma she wrote the cover story to National Geographic September issue, I think it was, where she says, if we're gonna save the land, we can't just depend on national parks and refuges. We have to practice conservation everywhere. And that to me is the working lands message.
Anything from Dr. Lanham out of Clemson that'll really open your eyes to the whole.
Drew Lanham? Yeah. I interviewed him one time. He is awesome.
Yeah. So it's really make you check yourself and appreciate your values of what we have. Obviously, all of Aldo's work, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, his wife was an accomplished, award-winning bow hunter who could arguably out-hunt him, so just keep that in mind, too, anything that she writes about that. And while we're getting the big books, I'll give you a little cheaty one about that size from Posowitz, the Beyond Fair Chase. And so it is hunting-focused, and it focuses on continuation of the land ethic. It's on personal ethic. It's on character development, responsibility to the resource, and might give you just additional tools for seeing what nature has taught and developed and endeared within you, and then how you can share that within others, and just ways to look at, again, how we value these things. I'm not going to butcher his quotes, but There's a piece where he talks about, a trophy animal and how that's not a testament to the hunter's prowess, but a testament to what a healthy habitat can provide. Mm-hmm. And that kind of messaging is how we need to engage, my world hunters and shooters and anglers and things like that. So that gives you just another tool. And the last thing would almost be a call to action to find your mentors.
Yeah.
Come volunteer if necessary, continue interns, whatever you have to do, partner with, find ways to bring your program to the existing programs and just force multiply that away and learn from them, make your mistakes on our clock, not your own, things like that. Because the knowledge that exists out there, take it and run with it and build on what's been established.
Well, it's an honor to sit up here with you guys. It's a huge fan of everything you're doing. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thanks for letting me bug you with a bunch of questions. And we're standing between these kind folks and their food, so we better wrap it up. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.